Hello and welcome to the Dualistic Unity movie review series, episode 4. I am glad I woke up this morning and appreciating just being alive here now and enjoying all the things that I'm able to do with being alive, because I'm not quite sure what the alternative would be these days.
And I used to be a real prick. I just wanted to say that out in the open to begin this episode, that if you were to meet me 20 years ago, you would be meeting a person who was completely lost in the illusion of control, completely lost in the need for validation, completely lost in a sense of isolation, regardless of how hard I was trying to fit into the world around me. And it really was its own hell. But as though by some miracle, I had a moment of clarity that made me recognize how beautiful my life was and what my priorities really were underneath all that need and confusion and loss. And it changed my life. And those moments are always there. They're always available. Sometimes when you don't recognize that they are so, especially when you don't recognize them, especially when you don't recognize that they are so. And so if you're still struggling, if you're still working through the darkness, I just want you to know that the light's right around the corner. You may not see it coming, but it's always available to you. It's just a matter of waiting for a moment of clarity and having the willingness to surrender what you think is right now, because it's how you got to where you are. So that all said, this movie review episode is about the movie Scrooged, which came out in 1988 and stars Bill Murray, Karen Allen, Carol Kane, Bobcat Goldthwait, and Alfre Woodard. It's a fantastic movie. Of course, it's a spin on the traditional Christmas Carol story of Scrooge himself, but it takes place in the late 80s. So in the time of television and movies and commercialization and a world of capitalism, it's really well done. I really liked this movie, and I was excited to introduce it to Andrew, who has never seen it before. So I'm glad that it is now added to his Christmas repertoire. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts were, Andrew.
Yeah, so I had seen Christmas Carol and am very familiar with that story in the past, and it does follow that, but it was cool to see it, in modern day. And so I don't really know where to start this one, because they're like, you kind of have the classic situation where it's a guy who, in this case, Bill Murray, being Frank in the movie, is a TV exec and basically just a fucking asshole to everyone. Like, he's Scrooge. And so everything that goes along with that character, pretty familiar character, I think, in most people's understanding, just a grumpy dude who doesn't really do many nice things for anyone and is just very much focused on himself. And yeah, that's pretty much what it came down to. But I'm curious from your take, like, because I wasn't quite sure where the shift was for him, like going back to Christmas Past and whatnot, his relationship with Claire, and then there's a scene with where he's the dog. And again, if we haven't made this clear, if you're watching this series, go watch the movie before, because there's tons of spoilers that are going to be in this episode. So there's the scene where he's the dog, and his boss invites him to dinner, and then Claire's like, "Oh, we can't do that," and he's all excited because his boss invited him to dinner, and feels kind of special. And then Claire's like, "Oh no, we have dinner with our friends. It's Christmas Eve. They're our best friends." And Frank's like, "This is not the time to be selfish. Like, what about my needs? What about our needs for this?" And he basically, I felt like that was very symbolic of him putting his job above the rest of his life, and Claire specifically. And so I feel like it was a very subtle sort of shift that led him down a certain path. But I'm curious, from your point of view, where you saw that shift, or why he began to become so hard and grumpy.
It's really interesting because you're talking about these subtle shifts that happen throughout this movie. And what I enjoy is they show you right from the very early moments of his life as he was watching television as a way of kind of tuning out the person that his father was, and the reality of not celebrating Christmas or having any joy in their household whatsoever. And so he was glued to the television, and that's where he got his obsession with television. But it also became where he learned to tune out the rest of the world as a way of protecting himself, right? And so after that, you see him get a little older and he gets his first job, and he's already super disconnected. Everybody around him is having a Christmas party and he's still doing work. He's not able to get into it. He's not able to relate to anybody. He doesn't recognize the opportunities for fun at all. So he's already on that path, and he's very much focused on it as a measure of his success, as a measure of his worth and happiness. And so he's completely single-minded until, oddly enough, he meets Claire. And Claire makes him feel something that he didn't feel at home. He didn't feel with his parents. He feels free, like he can be himself. He's really just enjoying his time with Claire without having to think about any future or any goal. With Claire, he feels like himself. And so when we get to the moment where he makes the decision between himself in terms of control and status and value and success versus that feeling of freedom where he just could be himself. And that's the choice he makes, is to continue down this path where he's constantly got to be in control. He's constantly got to be the best. And that's where we meet him at the beginning of the movie, right? When the executives are showing him what they have for the promo for the Scrooged special that's being done. And he's like, I am the youngest television executive that has ever been. I know what's best for everybody, right? Like, he really comes from this place, like he's just better. I love the point where he opens up the drawer and he looks at a mirror and he sees himself and he smiles, and it's the fakest smile. And it's just to show you that that's his relationship with himself. It's a mask, right? But he is not a happy person by any means. So yeah, I thought that was really, really interesting. The ghost of Christmas past always kind of makes me laugh. And there's one line right after the dog scene specifically where Frank is like, I know who I am, I know what I want, and I know what's going on. And then the next line is, what's going on? And that's exactly the point, right? Like, we convince ourselves that we do things because we know where they're going to go. And yet when we look back, and you can see the moment on Frank's face as soon as he recognizes that he's on the set for that dog show, his face drops. He knows exactly what choice he's looking at because he's thought about it before, right? And it's changed him. And then after he comes back from that vision of the ghost of Christmas past, that's when he goes and he's looking for Claire, right? And that's a really interesting scene too, when he goes out to Operation Reach Out and he's walking in as he's ranting about what's going on underneath the surface. I don't know if you caught any of that as he's ranting about his needs and his wants, and and the fact that if I want a wife, I'll buy a wife. And then basically he's going off about how this control thing should be working, and it's not, to the point where he's still chasing her down here to get her back in his life, right? But then do you notice that's not enough? Like, because she didn't want to leave then, didn't want to do what he had in mind, didn't have the same ideal that he did. That wasn't it, because he wasn't willing to change. He just wanted her in his life again. So he hadn't actually went back to being free. He was still looking at her as another result, looking at her as another means of control.
Yeah, that scene was very interesting where he was walking in, and because he was talking to himself, they just kind of assumed he was crazy, and they put a blanket around him and he sat there and just kind of fit in. And he was so caught up in the things he was thinking about in his mind that he wasn't even aware that he was like getting sat down in basically a soup kitchen for looking like he was crazy, and given a coffee, and everyone's crowding around him, talking to him, like trying to get him to say lines from Shakespeare or something like that. And it's funny because me and Ray were talking about stuff yesterday, and I was kind of expressing relationship stuff and talking about people who would be a good fit and past girlfriends and whatnot. And Ray said, yeah, I think you would want someone who's going to question you and not just kind of do whatever you want them to do. And so when that scene happened where Frank walks in and basically kind of gets Claire back, and then she, or seems like he's going to, and then she's like, well, I have to do this, and I have to check in on the turkey and the gas piping or whatever. And immediately he's like, no, just come with me, just do what I say, just do what I want. And it's like, it was the total opposite of what me and Ray were talking about yesterday, with like what you would actually want in a partner when you're letting go more and more of the idea of control. Is you don't want someone who just caters to your every wish and every need, because it's like that would get very uncomfortable if that was the case. And it's funny because I saw that, and the parallel was like, that's all that he wanted, because he was so lost in the idea that control is a real thing. And so, the perfect woman to him is someone who does just cater to his every need and every wish. And so because he was so lost in the idea of control and all of that, that was, as soon as he didn't have it, as soon as she was making her own decisions, he was like, no, I don't need you. And then he finishes off, bah humbug. And then he leaves. And so I just found that whole scene very interesting. And it was just a great show of the mentality that he was in.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting because, see, the whole thing with Frank is selfishness. He's focused on himself. And because of that, he's in a prison. And he sees Claire, who is basically selfless. And he wants that freedom that he feels with Claire, because she's not trying to get things out of him, so he can just be himself. So in that scene, he's asking her to join him in selfishness. Let's you and I go to a tropical beach, and we'll eat Chinese food, and we'll do all the things we want to do. As for everybody else, scrape them off. And that line says everything about how he views people. He views people as a weight that are getting in his way towards eventually achieving success or worth or happiness, right? And that's the reason he's always so stressed, right? It's the reason he doesn't give a shit about anybody. It's the reason he's terrified of his boss, right? Because he is. And it's the funniest relationship to watch. Like, you can see he's not being authentically himself with his boss. All of a sudden he meets Bryce Cummings, and he's totally worried about his job. He knows he's going to get replaced by this younger version of the person he's trying so hard to be. So there's so much that goes on there. But I have to ask, because admittedly, my favorite character in this movie is Carol Kane as the ghost of Christmas Present. She busts me up every time I watch this movie. So I want to ask, what did you think of the Ball Breaker Suite?
I thought that character was awesome. Like, I watched the end. We tried, so as a family, we tried to watch it. And everyone just kept falling asleep. So my mom and I just, like, everyone was doing stuff, and we watched it together. And she absolutely loved that character, as did I. Like, we were laughing pretty damn hard, because it was like she didn't give a shit about anything about Frank, like any of his status or whatever. She was like just kind of beating him around, like didn't even care, and kind of showing him the reality, just opening his eyes to the reality of what was happening, as opposed to, it's not even that he had a distorted view of things, like he did, but it was almost like he didn't have a view of things. Like, he didn't have a view at all. It wasn't that he was seeing, anyone in any certain way. It's like he wasn't even considering them. Like, he had such a strong veil that it was almost just a complete wall. Like, he didn't see anyone, and he didn't even need anyone. Like, he had no regard for the impact that his personal decisions would make. Like, early on in the movie, when he fired the guy who was trying to give him advice, and like immediately after he left, they had the conversation. He was like, told his assistant, like, yeah, go fire that guy, basically give him a few minutes. And he wasn't even considering the impact that may have on his job and his ability to get to the place that he wants to get to. Like, he's so enthralled in this idea of selfishness and just immediate personal decision making based on how he's feeling that he wouldn't even consider beyond that to any degree. And just like, oh, that guy, he's questioning my ability or my character or whatever, fire him. Doesn't even matter. It's not even a consideration. But yeah, going back to Ghost of Christmas Present, I thought she was fucking hilarious just the whole time, that entire character, because it was what no one in Frank's life was really ever willing to do to him, because he was able to put himself in a certain position of power and also just didn't give a shit at all about what anyone thought or what anyone was doing or any had any consideration for anything. So it was almost like he needed something to come around and smack him around a little bit to just like allow him to be aware, like smacking someone in the face, that's going to bring you to the present pretty damn quick. And so I think that was a good symbolism for bringing his focus back to where he's at instead of just veiled by his selfishness and his idea of himself and where he's going.
Because it's blinding him. That's the thing that they make obvious throughout the whole movie. Like even at the beginning of the movie, before any of the ghosts, before his boss visits him, and he gets the Humanitarian of the Year award, and he's like, "Oh, sometimes it hurts giving so much." And then he takes a cab back to his office and he leaves the award in the cab. Like he cares that little about it and doesn't even see that he's doing so. He sees the guards, he kind of sneers at them openly, right? He's not aware of anybody else's feelings because he's so focused on himself as a whole. And so when you get to the Ghost of Christmas Present, yeah, she's making him aware of the reality, and it is painful. And that's what being in the present is like. All of a sudden, all of the past comes up and you're just like, oh, this is what I'm making right now. And if you're judging yourself for it, you won't learn from it, right? But you need to see it. You need to have eyes wide open. And that's why it's interesting that he sees Herman, the homeless guy, that he could have helped survive by giving him a couple of bucks to heat his place. He sees Calvin, Grace's son. I love the fact that his assistant's name is Grace, by the way. I thought that was really symbolic because that's what he needs, is a little bit more grace, right? But to show how blind he is, he didn't even recognize that Grace wore black for a year because her husband had died violently, and that's what had left her son without the ability to speak, completely cut off, almost in the same way that Frank was, but for a way better reason. So there's some empathy there that Frank has for Calvin, which I find really interesting, right? But and then of course the relationship with his brother, which he's more or less not cultivating at all because he's so focused on himself, to the point where he doesn't even want to send his brother a nice gift because his brother doesn't have enough value that comes through him to Frank.
Yeah, in terms of for all the relationships, be it his assistant, Grace, his brother, Claire, and it's like he's not even capable of having a relationship because he's so blind to everything else. Like he doesn't see the utility, because in a relationship, it's like there is a give and take to a degree. You can't just be focused on yourself. In order to have a relationship, you need to be open to a degree. And because he just isn't at all, they show it very well that there are no relationships that he has. Like the number of scenes that he had in his office by himself, pouring himself a glass of vodka. Like I think that was just a great show of how alone he was. Like didn't have anyone to go home to, didn't have anyone to speak to, really. Like he has a couple phone calls in there with different people, but they're still very much self-serving. Like whenever he interacts with anyone, it's strictly self-serving. Like it's never a give, it's always a take. And if there is almost like a situation in which it is a give and take, like it just ends. Like it ends very, very quickly. But yeah, his relationship or lack of relationship with his brother is just another good show of that. And all of the gifts that he gives as well. It's like he's always giving the bare minimum. Like he has all the money that anyone could ever have. And it's like, because of course he does that, because he doesn't see any utility there. There is no benefit to himself in terms of gaining more control, getting more money, or really whatever his end goal is. I guess just going as high up as he can in his company, really. But it's so interesting how just like all of the things that most people strive for, because he's strictly embodying selfishness. It's like he's not even able to see the benefit in that. Like he's blind to his own suffering too, almost.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's because he spends so much time making other people suffer because of his suffering. That was the thing about the character at the beginning of the movie that he fired. He actually took joy in firing that character. It wasn't just that he had questioned him. He's like, 5 minutes. In 5 minutes, I'll give you my opinion. And then he made sure that character was fired and off the premises within 5 minutes. And to the point where, and I thought this was really interesting, I caught this, I think the third time I watched it, where he looks at Grace and he says, who is that person? Fire him. Grace gets on the phone to security and actually has a code number for firing somebody within 5 minutes because he's done this before. So yeah, Frank is completely cut off. So much into the investment and return mentality, because that's often how the ego works. We don't invest in anything unless we're getting a return out of it. When he's talking to his brother about Christmas, he's like, oh, I love Christmas. All of these idiots are going to be home watching TV tonight, which benefits him. Right. And they show it so beautifully how selfish he is. And I still think this moment's hilarious for how selfish it is. When the old lady is trying to get into the cab and he says, excuse me, miss, you dropped something. And so she turns around to pick it up and he gets in her cab and gives her the finger. That's exactly what kind of person Frank Cross is. Something else I caught actually this time around was actually the name Frank Cross. To be cross is actually to be upset. And to be frank is to be honest. So our character is named Honestly Upset.
That's awesome. Yeah, the just all of that. There's just so many situations of him just embodying pure selfishness, and also where that goes for him. Like he's never happy. He's never satisfied ever, like the entire movie until the end, until he lets go of that, until he recognizes what's actually happening. And so I was curious about this part because it seems so going into Ghost of Christmas Future, seeing, the repercussions of everything and where it all ends up. One of the main parts and kind of the shifting scene is when he sees his funeral, and it's just his brother and his what was that, sister-in-law, his brother's wife. And at first he thinks it's his brother in the coffin because it's just his brother's wife. And then his brother shows up and he's like, who is that in there? Who is that in there? And then so it's him. It's at his funeral and it's just the two of them. And then he starts getting pushed into the flames. And that's when he starts freaking out and he's in the coffin and, flames going up. And that's then goes through that and then kind of wakes up back in his office. And that's like the shift. So was it just do you think it was just the accumulation of seeing all of the shit throughout, past, present, future, and then gets to the point that like, that's when it ends, like he sees the end and where that train goes and then wakes up? I was kind of curious about the shift because it seemed like all of a sudden, boom, he's out of that extreme selfishness and, starts hugging the guy who was going to kill him, who he fired early on in the movie with the shotgun. And then, the whole ending of the movie is like very emotional and he's a completely changed and new person. So what do you think the symbolism was there of going through the incinerator?
We see that's the thing, right? Even with the Christmas Carol, it's really the stages that the character goes through that are important. Like, it's not just that he's seeing his past and his present and his future. It's that each and every time he's being dropped to his knees by that ghost, each and every time he's being put into a state where he doesn't feel like he's in control, he doesn't know what's going on, and he has to tap into humility, right? And so by the time the Ghost of Christmas Present finishes beating him in the face with a toaster, he's almost at his wit's end. Like, he's done in terms of not having a sense of control anymore. Like, he freaks out at the fake ghost of Christmas future in the elevator, right? He's like, oh my God. Like, he's had it. There's nothing left of the semblance of control that gave Frank his ability to continue on through life. And that's why you see him in his office drinking and trying not to shake as he's pouring himself a drink. And then the consequences of his life show up in Elliot Loudermilk and a shotgun. So a real world consequence to who he's been. All of a sudden he sees how all of his past has led to this moment where he might actually die. And then the ghost of Christmas future comes along. So he's already broken. He's broken as a person. And in that state, he's trying to maintain some dignity because he knows this is going to break him for sure. And so he sees Calvin, who's still not talking and has withdrawn to the point where he's no longer even in society anymore. He's been locked up. And he resonates with that. Like, you can see it really hits him because that's something he could easily prevent. Given all of his contacts and all of his wealth, he could easily help with that. And it hits him. And then what I think is interesting is when he does get to that scene with his brother and his brother's wife, and he's like, oh, it's not James, it's Diane. No, who's in the box? He knows very well who's in the box. It's so very interesting. Even Celeste is like, well, wouldn't he put it together? I'm like, he wouldn't want to put it together. That's the point. And then when he finally gets there, because there's this denial, like, no, I can change everything I've seen. I can change everything I've seen. And then when the box starts going into the flames and he's trying to pull it back, you can hear he actually says, why are you showing me all this stuff if I can't do anything about it? And then he's in the box, showing that there's an end. And you really can't do anything about it at this point. And that's when he wakes up. That's when he comes back into the world of the living. He's like, oh my God, I can still do something about this. I'm alive. I can change it all. That's why that moment is so powerful, is because it's a buildup from the beginning of the movie onward, right? And you see it as he starts coming apart here and there, like in the restaurant, for example, when he just freaks out because the ghosts are messing with him. They are deliberately making him have a breakdown because that's the only way you can get through. As long as you have the semblance of control, you can convince yourself that you're still in control, and you can keep running back to it to the point of your own detriment.
Yeah. So I guess throughout, they're basically chipping away at his idea of control, which was kind of the crux of his ability to act in the way that he did, was because he was able to maintain that idea of control. And so I think, and this is probably something, after you watch it a few times, you start to get a feel for like the progress of it. I was still very much just like, what's happening here? And so you see, I guess, a little bit more of the symbolism the more times you see it, and are able to catch that sort of chipping away of it. So it's not just that final scene. It's like he's recognized that, oh my gosh, maybe I don't have the control that I thought. And so it's like, it's almost like at first it starts chipping away and he's like, no, I still have it. I still have it. And then it chips away even more. And he starts to like kind of bug out. And then he's like, starts questioning that. And then it gets to a point where it's like a process. And then finally it's like, oh my God, I can't do anything. And it's like, so I guess going back to where I asked about going into the incinerator, it's almost like that's when he realizes that he has no control. And that's where it's like, it's all gone. It's not coming back. And then he wakes up and he's like, oh my God. So it's like he's born again without so much desire for control and selfishness.
Or even the belief that it works. See, that's the thing, is he's seen where the path of selfishness and control will end up. He sees the ripples that it has. And so all of a sudden, it's not even an option anymore. And that's where he finds freedom, in recognizing it's how you live here and now. And that's why when he gets off the elevator, he doesn't even care about the shotgun, right? He cares about Elliot. He wants to make Elliot feel the same way that he feels. And that's what leads him to the ending scene, right? Is how he feels in that moment. He doesn't have a plan. He just knows how he feels and he wants to express it. And that's exactly the point, right? That's exactly what all of this journey is about. is recognizing that the more you control things, the more you're distorting it, the more you're not being yourself because you're trying to be something, and it creates a prison for you. One of my favorite scenes that shows that example actually is when he first sees Claire. So after the first ghost visits him, after Lee Hayward, his boss, visits him, and he calls Claire and he freaks out, and she comes down to see him at the studio, and he's all feeling good again. He's talking to her, and there's this hammering in the background, and it's not making him happy at all. And so he keeps saying, like, would you quit the hammering? And he could just be enjoying the conversation, but he keeps getting more and more upset by it. And finally, he's like, quit the goddamn hammering. And the whole set comes down because they were trying to put it together. And it's a perfect example of exactly what control does, right? He didn't understand everything that was going on. He didn't even ask. He just wanted to be in control because that's how he felt that he should be. And that's exactly how the movie carries on after that. But the reason I love the last scene so much is because everything that the movie was about, which was the creation of this huge, huge live event on television. There was so much planning. There was so much in terms of expenditure and in terms of manpower. Like, it's a huge event that they're planning throughout the whole movie. And because he feels free, he says, fuck it. And he ruins the goddamn event. And he puts himself in the end of the story about Scrooge and wraps it up in a way that's more relevant to anybody who's watching.
Yeah, that last scene is very powerful. And I saw it even him going into the situation, he said, like, not having a plan anymore for a situation that was very, very planned. It's like you almost got to feel that he was free, but there was no idea of what he was going to say or what he was going to do. He just kind of got on there and started, like, there's a kid next to him with the top hat and starts like clumsily tapping the top hat, and the top hat's like falling down on the kid. And so even then he's expressing all of this, and it's like, God, it looks like he's, I don't know, making fun of the kid or something, but it's just total lack of desire for anything to happen correctly. And he just starts speaking from himself, like he taps into a sort of flow state and just starts saying what he's recognized from all this buildup and the letting go of that, need for control and that selfishness that he's been experiencing the entire movie. He lets go of that, and he's just able to, tap into this beautiful monologue to finish off the movie, and everything sort of comes together perfectly. The boy who didn't speak the entire movie finally speaks in perfect timing. He just shows up right next to him. It's like everything happens more perfectly than he could have ever imagined. And even his boss, who's watching on TV, with his wife, like, at first he's like, what the fuck is going on? This is crazy. This is awful. Like, what's he doing? And by the end, they're like got their arms around each other and they're smiling and really enjoying the whole thing. And whether or not they were thinking about, the impacts of it and how this could actually turn out better than the show, who knows? But they had kind of let go too. And because Frank was clearly free in himself, he allowed everyone else to feel free in themselves too.
Yeah. And that was what came across. It wasn't scripted. It was authentic and it was raw. And what I thought was really interesting about the point where Calvin speaks is that during the vision that Frank is having about the future, he says to the ghost of Christmas Future that, I know the top doctor at the local hospital, we're going to have Calvin looked at. We've got this. Like, we're going to make sure this gets addressed. Calvin didn't need a doctor. He needed someone who was free. He needed someone who he saw break free. And that's what Calvin needed. So the moment was perfect. That's why it was so touching. The other point was what Frank was actually communicating in that moment. He wasn't talking about God. He wasn't talking about belief. He wasn't even talking about Santa or Jesus or anything else. He was talking about the miracle of selflessness. That in giving, you are being more free. And it's that easy. And he finally saw it because he stopped focusing on himself. And he saw it for what it was, a miracle. He's like, I get it now. I get it. And I'm hungry for it. Right. And that's what we feel when we suddenly break free. when we suddenly recognize what it is to just be ourselves, and there's this deep, intense relief, and then tears, and then kind of a little bit of frustration and a whole bunch of other stuff. But it's that moment that we break free, that we're like, this is all I want to give to people. It's all I want to share. And he says, some people are having problems finding their miracle. You can help them just by not focusing on yourself. So it's a fantastic movie. It really is very well done. And it's one of my favorite Christmas movies. And so as many times as I've watched it, I still pick up new things as I watch it. And I'm very excited for you, Andrew, because now I know it's going to be in your Christmas arsenal. And the next time that you watch it, you're going to get a lot more out of it. There's a lot in that movie. It's really, really well done. And so I just wanted to say to our listener, if you haven't had a chance to go watch it, definitely go and watch it. I'm sure being around Christmas, you're going to find it on numerous different streaming platforms. And if you can't, you might even find a copy online somewhere for free, but it's worth the watch. I definitely recommend it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just a fantastic story of someone being seemingly so lost in the illusion of control, in their idea of themselves, and actually being able to recognize a way out and free themselves. Because as much as he was shown, by all the ghosts, by everyone in his life, the opportunity for it, like, he had to see it for himself, and he had to make the change for himself, and he had to make the decision for himself. And that's what he did. And then, yeah, at the end there, just with basically yelling into the TV camera, like, you can do this. It doesn't just have to be a Christmas Eve or a Christmas thing. You can do this every single day. It was really cool, and is something that I think everyone can take away some lessons from. So yeah, it's a awesome movie, and I appreciate you recommending it, Ray.
Yeah, absolutely. There's this one line in the movie. Actually, I caught it this time, and I've never caught it before, when he gets off the elevator and the ex-employee still wants to shoot him, and he's super happy to see him. And Elliot Loudermilk says, "I'm confused. I was looking for a Francis Xavier Cross." And Bill Murray says, "That's me. But the best thing is, that's not me." And that's very much where his whole story changes. So thank you for joining us for this Dualistic Unity movie review. We will see you next week for our next review. If you have any suggestions for future movies that we can cover, definitely let us know on Discord or join us on Patreon. Thanks so much.
Bye, everyone.